The Saturday morning rush at Rosie's Diner was in full swing. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with sizzling bacon filled the air. Families packed into red vinyl booths, their laughter and chatter creating a warm buzz throughout the restaurant. Waitresses weaved between tables, balancing plates and refilling coffee cups with practiced ease. In the far corner, away from the noise and chaos, sat a father and his young son. They'd been coming here for 3 weeks now, always arriving at exactly 9:30, always requesting the same booth by the window. The father, David, was in his early 30s with tired eyes that told a story of sleepless nights and constant worry. His son, 6-year-old Leo, sat beside him with an iPad propped on the table, noise-canceling headphones covering his small ears. Most of the staff had learned to approach their table with caution. During their first visit, Leo had a meltdown that lasted 20 minutes. Plates had been knocked over. Other customers had stared. The little boy had screamed and rocked back and forth, completely unreachable. David had tried everything to calm him down, his face red with embarrassment and exhaustion. Since then, the servers drew straws to see who would take their table. Nobody wanted the difficult booth in the corner, but Rachel noticed something different. She was 28, working the morning shift while finishing her degree in speech therapy. Where others saw a problem child, she saw a little boy who was trying his best to make sense of a confusing world. She'd studied autism in her classes, spent hours reading about nonverbal communication, and something about Leo reminded her why she'd chosen this path in the first place. That morning, as the shift assignments were handed out, Rachel volunteered for the corner booth. The other waitresses looked at her like she'd lost her mind. One of them, an older woman named Betty, shook her head. "Good luck with that one, honey. The kid doesn't even look at you. Just grunts and throws things. The dad tries, bless his heart, but it's like talking to a brick wall." Rachel grabbed her notepad and headed toward the corner. She'd spent the previous night doing something she'd never done before. Using pictures printed from the internet and an old laminating machine from the library, she'd created a simple communication board. It had images of the diner's most popular breakfast items: pancakes, eggs, bacon, orange juice, toast. Nothing fancy. But maybe, just maybe, it would help. As she approached the table, David was doing what he did every week. He was trying to guess what Leo might want to eat, speaking in a soft, patient voice that carried the weight of 1,000 repeated attempts. "Do you want pancakes today, buddy? You liked those last time. Or maybe French toast. We could try French toast." Leo didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on his iPad where colorful shapes moved across the screen. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the case. To most people, it looked like he wasn't even aware his father was talking. But David knew better. He'd learned to read the tiny signs. The way Leo's tapping slowed down slightly when he mentioned pancakes meant he was listening, even if he couldn't show it in traditional ways. Rachel stopped a few feet from the table. She took a deep breath. Everything she'd learned in her classes was one thing. Real life was completely different. Her heart pounded as she approached, not with fear, but with hope that she could make a difference. Instead of standing over them like the other servers did, Rachel did something unexpected. She knelt down beside the booth, bringing herself to Leo's eye level. David looked up, surprised. Most people either ignored Leo completely or talked over him like he wasn't there. "Good morning," Rachel said, her voice calm and gentle. She wasn't speaking to David. She was speaking to Leo. She waited a moment, giving the little boy time to process her presence. Then, slowly, she placed the laminated communication board on the table next to his iPad. David's eyes widened when he saw it. His throat tightened with emotion he hadn't expected to feel in a diner on a random Saturday morning. Rachel pointed to the picture of pancakes, then pointed to herself, then smiled. She didn't rush. She didn't fill the silence with nervous chatter. She simply waited. The diner buzzed around them, but at that corner table, time seemed to slow down. Leo's tapping on the iPad stopped. It was subtle, so subtle that most people wouldn't have noticed. But David noticed. He held his breath, afraid that any movement might break whatever was happening. Rachel kept her finger on the pancakes picture. She pointed to it again, then to the kitchen, using simple gestures to show that she could bring him this food. Still, she didn't rush. She understood that Leo needed time to process, time to decide if he could trust this new person in his space. 30 seconds passed. They felt like hours. David wanted to apologize, to explain that his son might not respond. that they could just order the usual. But something in Rachel's calm expression told him to wait. Then it happened. Leo's eyes shifted. Just slightly, just for a moment, they moved from the iPad to the communication board. His small hand, which had been tapping on the iPad, slowly reached out. His finger hovered over the board, trembling slightly. And then, with deliberate intention, he tapped the picture of chocolate chip pancakes. David's vision blurred with tears. It seemed like such a small thing. A child pointing at a picture of food. People did it every day without thinking. But for David, it was everything. It was the first time in months that someone had tried to communicate directly with his son. Not through him. Not around him. But with him. Rachel's smile grew. Chocolate chip pancakes. Excellent choice, she said, writing it down in her notepad. She gave Leo a thumbs up. Another visual cue that he'd done something good. Would you like some orange juice too? She pointed to the juice picture. Leo looked at the board again. This time it took less time. He tapped the orange juice. Perfect, Rachel said. She stood up and looked at David. And for you, sir? David could barely speak. Just coffee. Thank you. Thank you so much. His voice cracked on the last words. Rachel gave him a knowing nod. She'd seen that look before in the faces of parents at the therapy clinics where she volunteered. It was relief mixed with hope, exhaustion mixed with gratitude. It was the face of a parent who'd been fighting alone for so long that even the smallest gesture of help felt like a miracle. As Rachel walked back to the kitchen, she didn't know that she'd just changed the course of 2 lives. She didn't know that David had been at his breaking point, wondering if he was failing his son. She didn't know that Leo's mother had left them 2 years ago, unable to handle the challenges of raising a child with special needs. She didn't know that David cried himself to sleep most nights, terrified that his son would never have a place in this world. All she knew was that a little boy had pointed at a picture of pancakes, and somehow that felt like the most important thing she'd done all week. Back in the kitchen, as she clipped the order to the line, Rachel made a mental note. Next week she'd bring more pictures, maybe some emotion cards, maybe a visual schedule so Leo would know what to expect during their visit. She had so many ideas, so many tools she'd learned about that might help. She didn't do it for recognition or praise. She did it because it was the right thing to do, because every child deserved to be seen, to be heard, to be given a chance to communicate in whatever way worked for them. At the corner table, Leo put his headphones back on and returned to his iPad. But something had shifted. David noticed it in the way his son's shoulders seemed less tense, in the tiny smile that played at the corners of his mouth. For the first time in a very long time, Saturday morning felt less like a battle to get through and more like something to look forward to. The following Saturday, David and Leo arrived at the diner at their usual time. But something was different. Leo wasn't wearing his headphones around his neck like he normally did. They were in his backpack. David had noticed his son moving a bit faster that morning, almost eager to leave the house. It was a small change, but after years of routine being everything to Leo, any change felt significant. As they walked through the door, Leo's eyes scanned the restaurant. David realized with a start that his son was looking for someone. Looking for Rachel. She spotted them immediately and waved from across the room. Leo's hand came up in a small wave back. David nearly stumbled. His son had just waved at someone, voluntarily, without prompting. He had to blink back tears for the second week in a row. Rachel approached their corner booth with something tucked under her arm. When she knelt down beside the table, David saw that she'd expanded her communication tools. She now had a small binder filled with laminated pages. There were more food pictures, but also other things. Pictures showing the sequence of events. Sitting down, ordering, eating, paying, leaving. Simple drawings of emotions, happy, sad, frustrated, excited. "Good morning, Leo," Rachel said warmly. She opened the binder to a page that showed a visual schedule. "I made this for you, see? First we look at the menu. Then you choose your food. Then I bring the food. Then you eat. Then we're all done. Does that sound okay?" She waited, giving Leo time to process each image. He studied the schedule carefully, his fingers tracing over the pictures. Then he looked up at Rachel and nodded. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Another breakthrough. David watched in amazement as Rachel went through the ordering process with Leo using the pictures. She'd added new breakfast items, including waffles with strawberries. Leo pointed to those, then to the orange juice again. The whole interaction took maybe 3 minutes. But those 3 minutes were filled with more communication than David usually got from his son in an entire day. As Rachel stood to leave, David finally found his voice. "Excuse me," he said quietly. I need to know. Why are you doing this? The other servers, they avoid us. They think we're too much trouble. But you're doing all this extra work, making these boards, learning all this. Why?" Rachel smiled, but there was something sad in her eyes. "My little brother was a lot like Leo," she said softly. "He was nonverbal too. Autism, developmental delays, the whole thing. And I watched my parents struggle because nobody understood him. Teachers gave up on him. Kids were cruel. Even family members would talk about him like he wasn't in the room, like he couldn't understand." She paused, glancing at Leo, who was back to looking at his iPad but seemed calmer, more present. "My brother taught me that just because someone can't speak doesn't mean they have nothing to say. It just means we need to find a different way to listen." David's throat tightened. "Where is he now?" "Your brother? He's doing great, actually. He's 19 now, working at a grocery store bagging items. He uses an iPad to communicate, types out what he wants to say. It took years, so many years of people not giving up on him, but he got there." Rachel's smile brightened. "I'm studying speech therapy because of him. I want to help kids like Leo, kids like my brother was, and if I can start here, in a diner on Saturday mornings, then that's where I'll start." Over the next few weeks, Saturday mornings became the highlight of David's week. More than that, they became the highlight of Leo's week too. The changes were gradual but unmistakable. Leo started arriving without his headphones entirely. He'd walk into the diner and look for Rachel right away. When she greeted him, he'd make eye contact for a few seconds, something his therapist had been working on for years with limited success. Rachel kept expanding her tools. She brought in basic sign language cards teaching Leo simple signs for please and thank you and more. She made emotion cards and would show Leo different faces, asking him to point to how he felt that day. Sometimes he'd point to happy, sometimes frustrated, sometimes tired, but he was communicating and that was everything. The other staff members started to notice. Betty, the older waitress who'd warned Rachel about the difficult table, approached her one morning during a break. "What you're doing with that little boy," she said, her voice softer than usual. "It's something special. I've been working here 15 years and I've never seen anything like it." Rachel shrugged modestly. "I'm just meeting him where he is. That's all any of us should do." But Betty shook her head. "No, honey. Most people don't do that. Most people expect everyone to meet them where they are. What you're doing, it's changing that boy's life." Rachel started training the other servers too. She made copies of the communication boards and kept them in a binder behind the counter. She taught them simple strategies. Speak clearly but not loudly. Give extra time for processing. Use visual cues when possible. Don't take it personally if a child doesn't respond the way you expect. One Saturday, something remarkable happened. Rachel had brought new picture cards showing different ways to customize pancakes. Chocolate chips, blueberries, bananas, whipped cream. She spread them out on the table for Leo to see. Leo studied them carefully. Then instead of just pointing, he did something new. He picked up 2 cards, the chocolate chips and the bananas, and held them both up to Rachel. "You want both?" Rachel asked, making sure she understood. "Chocolate chips and bananas on your pancakes?" Leo nodded, then did something that made both Rachel and David freeze. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. And then in a voice that was quiet and unused but unmistakably there, he made a sound. It wasn't a word, not quite, but it was intentional vocalization, directed at another person, expressing desire and satisfaction. David's hand started shaking. His son had been completely nonverbal for 6 years. Therapists had told him that Leo might never speak, that they should focus on alternative communication methods. And here in a diner over pancakes, his son had made a sound that carried meaning. Rachel's eyes were shining, but she kept her composure. That does sound good," she agreed. "Chocolate chips and bananas coming right up." When she walked away, David put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. Leo, noticing his father's distress, reached over and patted David's arm. It was a gesture of comfort, of connection. Another first. The pancakes arrived with elaborate decoration. Rachel had arranged the chocolate chips and bananas in a smiley face. Leo looked at it and that smile appeared again, bigger this time. He picked up his fork and started eating, actually engaging with his food rather than just mechanically consuming it. As other customers came and went, a few started noticing the interaction at the corner table. An elderly couple smiled warmly. A mother with her own young children watched with interest. But there were others too. A businessman in a suit who kept glancing over with irritation when Leo made his happy humming sounds while eating. A teenager who whispered to her friend and giggled when Leo's hand started flapping with excitement. Rachel saw it all. She'd been noticing it for weeks. The stares, the whispers, the way some people would request tables far away from the corner booth. It bothered her more than she let on, because what she saw when she looked at Leo wasn't a problem to be avoided. She saw a sweet kid who was working twice as hard as everyone else, just to do things that came naturally to other children. She saw a boy who was trying, who was learning, who was making progress every single week. And she saw a father who was exhausted, who was doing everything alone, who loved his son more than anything in the world, but was clearly running on empty. As she refilled David's coffee, she made a decision. This couldn't just be about Saturday mornings anymore. She needed to do more. She didn't know exactly what yet, but she knew that Leo deserved better than a world that saw him as an inconvenience. He deserved a world that made space for him, that celebrated his victories no matter how small they seemed to others. When David paid the check that morning, he added a $50 tip to a $20 meal. Rachel tried to refuse it, but he insisted. "You're giving my son something I can't buy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're giving him dignity. You're treating him like a person, not a problem. That's worth more than money." Rachel took the tip, but only because she had a plan for it. She'd use it to buy more supplies, make more communication tools, create more resources. Not just for Leo, but for any family that might walk through those doors needing help. As David and Leo left the diner that morning, Leo turned back and waved at Rachel again. This time the gesture was confident, deliberate. He'd found someone who understood him, and in a world that often felt confusing and overwhelming, that meant everything. Rachel waved back, already planning what new tools she'd bring next Saturday, already thinking about how she could expand this to help more families, already knowing, deep in her heart, that this was just the beginning of something bigger than either of them could imagine. The corner booth wasn't just a table anymore. It had become a place of hope, of progress, of human connection that transcended words. And every Saturday morning, it reminded everyone who saw it that sometimes the most powerful communication happens in the spaces between language, in the patience between attempts, in the understanding between hearts. It started like any other Saturday morning. David woke up early, made Leo's favorite breakfast at home, and got him ready for their weekly trip to the diner. Leo was excited if you knew how to read the signs. He went straight to the car without any prompting. He brought his communication board that Rachel had made a copy of for them to keep at home. These were all good signs. The parking lot was more crowded than usual. David had to park farther away, but Leo didn't seem to mind the longer walk. As they approached the entrance, Leo was already looking through the windows, searching for that familiar face. But when they walked inside, something was different. The atmosphere felt off. The diner was packed, almost chaotic. There was a large group celebrating a birthday in the middle section. Balloons everywhere, loud music playing. David's stomach dropped. This wasn't the calm, predictable environment Leo had come to expect, and Rachel wasn't there. Behind the counter stood a younger server David had never seen before. She was rushing around, clearly overwhelmed by the crowd. Betty was handling 3 tables at once, sweat on her forehead. There was no sign of Rachel anywhere. David's hand instinctively went to Leo's shoulder. "It's okay, buddy. Let's find our table." But their corner booth wasn't empty. A family of 5 had taken it, spread out with plates and drinks covering every inch of the table. David felt panic rising in his chest. Everything was wrong. The noise, the crowd, the missing booth, and most importantly, no Rachel. The young server rushed over, barely making eye contact. "Hi, welcome to Rosie's. Just 2? It'll be about 15 minutes for a table." "We usually sit in that corner booth," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Is there any way—" "Sorry, first come first served," she said, already turning away. "You can wait by the door." David looked down at Leo. His son's face had changed. The anticipation was gone, replaced by confusion and the early signs of distress. Leo's hands started flapping at his sides, a self-soothing behavior that meant he was getting overwhelmed. "It's okay," David said softly, kneeling down. "We can wait. Rachel will be here soon." But Leo was already spiraling. The noise from the birthday party got louder. Someone popped a balloon and the sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. Leo flinched, his whole body going rigid. His hands went to his ears, pressing hard. "We need a table now," David said urgently to the young server. "Please, my son has autism and he needs—" "I told you 15 minutes, she snapped, clearly stressed. Everyone has to wait their turn. That's when it happened. Leo's control broke. He started screaming, a high-pitched sound that cut through all the other noise in the diner. His body went stiff, then started rocking. He dropped to the floor, hitting his head with his palms over and over. David dropped down beside him, trying to stop him from hurting himself. "Leo, buddy, look at me. You're safe. You're okay." But Leo couldn't hear him. He was too far gone into the meltdown, lost in a world of overwhelming sensations and broken expectations. His screams got louder. He kicked out, catching David in the shin. A glass of water on a nearby table got knocked over in the chaos, crashing to the floor. The entire diner went quiet except for Leo's screams. Everyone was staring. A woman grabbed her child and moved away. The birthday party stopped mid-song. David's face burned with shame and helplessness. His hands shook as he tried to calm Leo, but nothing was working. "Sir, you need to control your child," the young server said. "You're disturbing the other customers." David looked up at her, tears in his eyes. "I'm trying. He has autism. He can't help it." "Maybe you should take him outside," she suggested. A man from a nearby booth called out, "Yeah, some of us are trying to eat here." David wanted to disappear, but Leo was still on the floor, completely unreachable, trapped in his own overwhelming world. Betty appeared, looking distressed. "Where's Rachel? She knows how to handle this." "She called in sick," the young server said. "Some kind of flu." David felt his heart sink even further. Rachel wasn't coming. There was no rescue coming. He was alone in this, just like he'd been alone in everything else since his wife left. Then Frank, the owner, pushed through the crowd. His gruff face was set in hard lines. David braced himself for the words he'd heard at other restaurants, other public places. "You need to leave. He's too disruptive. Maybe you should try takeout instead." But Frank surprised him. He held up both hands to the crowd. "Everyone just back up. Give the kid some space. The more you stare, the worse it gets." He knelt down next to David, his old knees cracking. "Rachel keeps those communication cards in a binder behind the counter. The ones with pictures. Should I grab them?" David nodded, unable to speak. Frank moved faster than David would have thought possible for a man his age. He returned with the binder, flipping through it with thick fingers. "Which ones?" Frank asked. "The calm down ones?" "Yes," David managed to say. "The blue section." Frank pulled out the laminated cards Rachel had made. There was a sequence of pictures showing deep breaths counting to 5 and a calm face. He held them where Leo could see them, though he was careful not to get too close or touch the boy. "Leo," Frank said in a surprisingly gentle voice. "Look here, son. Let's breathe together." But Leo was too far gone. The cards weren't working. Nothing was working. His screams had turned to sobs and he was still hitting himself. David caught his hands, holding them as gently as he could, whispering the same words over and over. "You're safe. I've got you. You're safe." Minutes felt like hours. The other customers went back to their meals. Some people left, shooting David dirty looks. Others whispered to each other. Finally, Leo's sobs began to quiet. His body stopped rocking. Exhausted, he collapsed against David's chest, hiccuping and trembling. David wrapped his arms around him, his own tears falling. "I'm so sorry," David whispered. "I'm so sorry, buddy." Frank stood up slowly. "Here it comes," David thought. "The ban. The request to never come back. Listen," Frank said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "You two come back next week. Rachel will be back by then." David looked up at him, confused. "You still want us to come back?" "Why wouldn't I? Kid had a rough morning. Just call ahead next week. We'll make sure your booth is open and Rachel's here." The young server spoke up. "Mr. Frank, people left without paying." Frank turned to her sharply. "Then you better learn what Rachel knows. That kid is a paying customer just like everyone else. He deserves to eat breakfast without being judged." The server's face went red, but she didn't say anything else. Frank looked back at David. "Take your time. When Leo's ready, we'll get you seated. Your breakfast is on the house today. Consider it an apology for not being better prepared. David couldn't believe what he was hearing. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to, Frank said. I want to. Now how about we get you two into the kitchen area? It's quieter back there. You can sit at the staff table until Leo feels better. 20 minutes later, Leo was calm enough to sit at a small table in the back kitchen. It was quiet there. Frank brought them pancakes himself, and Leo ate slowly, still recovering. David's phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. I heard what happened. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. How's Leo? Betty must have called her. David typed back, he's okay now. Frank was amazing, but I don't know if we can keep coming. What if this happens again? Rachel's response came quickly. It won't. We'll be better prepared. I'll make sure of it. Don't give up on us, please. David looked at his son, who was finally starting to look like himself again. Leo was exhausted, but he was eating. He was safe. And for the first time after a public meltdown, they hadn't been kicked out. Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe they shouldn't give up just yet. But as David watched the other diners through the kitchen doorway, saw the way some were still whispering, he wondered if anywhere would ever truly feel safe for his son. He didn't know that everything was about to change. He didn't know that Rachel was already planning something that would change not only their lives, but countless others. All he knew was that they'd survived another day, and sometimes that was enough. Rachel spent 3 days in bed with the flu, but her mind never stopped working. She kept thinking about Leo and David. Betty had called her right after the meltdown, describing everything. The chaos, the stares, the way David had looked so broken on that diner floor. She'd failed them. The guilt ate at her worse than any fever. On the 4th day, still weak but determined, Rachel dragged herself to her laptop. She started researching articles about autism acceptance, videos of training programs for businesses, stories from other parents who faced the same battles David did every day. This wasn't just about Leo. There were thousands of families out there who couldn't go to restaurants without fear. Families who stayed home because the world wasn't ready to accept their children. Kids who deserved pancakes at a diner but couldn't because nobody took the time to understand. Rachel made a decision. When she went back to work, things were going to change. By Saturday morning, Rachel was back behind the counter, still a bit pale, but ready. She'd arrived an hour early to prepare. The corner booth had a reserved sign on it. She'd printed new communication cards, laminated them herself at midnight. She'd even created a what to expect today visual schedule, knowing that predictability would help Leo feel safe again. When David's car pulled into the parking lot at 9:30, Rachel watched through the window. She could see him sitting there, not moving, just staring at the diner. He was afraid. She understood why. Last week had been traumatic for both of them. Finally, David and Leo got out of the car. Leo was wearing his headphones again, something he hadn't needed in weeks. He walked slower, more hesitant. The confidence he'd been building was shaken. Rachel met them at the door. Hey, you two. I'm so glad you came back. David's eyes were red-rimmed like he hadn't been sleeping. We almost didn't. I wasn't sure if we should. I'm glad you did, Rachel said softly. She knelt down to Leo's level. Hi, Leo, I missed you last week. I was sick, but I'm better now. Your table is ready, and I brought some new pictures to show you. Leo didn't make eye contact, but he followed her to the corner booth. David noticed immediately that the diner was quieter today. The music was lower. There were fewer customers. It felt intentional. Did you do this? David asked as they sat down. Rachel smiled. Frank and I had a talk. Saturday mornings are going to be a little different from now on. We're calling them sensory-friendly hours. Lower music, dimmer lights, and we're limiting the number of customers. It's better for everyone, really. Less stressful. David felt his throat tighten. You changed your whole business model because of us. Not just because of you, Rachel said. Because it's the right thing to do. There are 6 other families with special needs, kids who've already called asking about it. Word spreads fast in support groups. She pulled out the new communication board and the visual schedule. Leo looked at them, processing. Rachel pointed to each picture, explaining what would happen. Order food, eat food. Everything would be calm and predictable. No surprises, and Leo, Rachel added, pulling out one more card. If you start feeling overwhelmed, you can show me this card. It was a picture of a stop sign with the words, I need a break. If I see this, We'll find you a quiet space. No questions asked. No judgment, okay? Leo reached out and touched the card. Then, for the first time since they'd arrived, he looked at Rachel's face. Really looked, and he nodded. David had to turn away. He was crying again, but this time it wasn't from shame or exhaustion. It was from relief, from gratitude so deep he didn't have words for it. I don't know how to thank you, he managed to say. You don't have to thank me, Rachel said, but actually I do want to talk to you about something. After you two eat, breakfast was peaceful. Leo ordered using his communication board. He ate his chocolate chip pancakes slowly. The few other customers in the diner were quiet and respectful. One mother with a young daughter even waved at Leo. Her daughter had Down syndrome and they'd driven an hour to be there. When they were finished, Rachel sat down at their booth. She pulled out her phone and showed David something she'd been working on. I've been researching, she said. There are training programs that teach businesses how to be more inclusive, how to communicate with nonverbal kids, how to create sensory-friendly environments. But they're expensive. What if we created our own program, free? We could train restaurants using everything I've learned and everything you've experienced. That's a beautiful idea, David said, but something like that takes money. I'm a graphic designer working from home. I can barely afford Leo's therapy. We could start a nonprofit, apply for grants. I'm finishing my speech therapy degree and you have design skills. We could actually do this, David wanted to believe her, but he'd been disappointed so many times before. I appreciate what you're saying, David said carefully, but changing one diner is different from changing the world. Most people don't care enough to try. You're wrong, Rachel said firmly. Frank cares. Betty cares now. That family over there cares. She pointed to the mother with the daughter with Down syndrome. People care when they understand. They just need someone to teach them. David looked at his son. Leo was content, using a napkin to wipe his face without being told. He was engaged with the world around him in a way he never was at home. The diner had given him that. Rachel had given him that. What would you need from me? David asked. Rachel's face lit up. Your story. Leo's story. If we're going to convince people that this matters, we need to show them why. We need to show them real families, real struggles, real solutions. Would you be comfortable with that? David thought about it. His privacy had been his shield for so long. He never posted about Leo on social media. He never shared their struggles with anyone except his sister. The thought of putting their story out there, vulnerable for everyone to see, terrified him. But he also thought about last week. The stares, the whispers. The man who told him to take Leo outside like he was a disturbance instead of a child. If they stayed silent, nothing would ever change. Leo would face that same discrimination his whole life. Okay, David said. I'll do it. We'll do it. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Thank you. We're going to call it a place at the table, because every child deserves that. A place at the table. Over the next week, they got to work. David created a simple website. Rachel wrote training materials. They made communication boards available as free downloads. They created a video showing how to set up a sensory-friendly environment. David did something he never thought he'd do. He wrote about Leo, about the meltdowns, about the isolation, about how one waitress had changed their lives. He posted it on the website with photos of Leo using the communication boards. Then Rachel shared the website in a few online support groups for parents of special needs children. Maybe 100 people would see it, they thought. They went to bed that night not expecting much. Small changes, they told themselves. Maybe they'd help a few families. Maybe a few restaurants would download the materials. But when David woke up the next morning and checked the website, his hands started shaking. The post had been shared over 1,000 times. Parents were commenting, crying, thanking them. Restaurant owners were asking questions. Local news stations were requesting interviews. His phone rang. It was Rachel and she was crying. David, have you seen it? It's everywhere. People are sharing it. They're saying it changed how they see autism, how they see their own children. David sat on his bed staring at the numbers climbing on his screen. Shares, comments, emails flooding in. People from across the country saying the same thing. We need this. Please help us. He walked to Leo's room. His son was still asleep, peaceful and unaware that he'd just become the face of a movement. David felt pride, fear, hope, and responsibility all at once. One story, One waitress. One decision to care. And now thousands of people were paying attention. David didn't know if they were ready for what was coming, but as he watched his son sleep, he knew they had to try. Leo deserved a world that made space for him. And maybe, just maybe, they could help create it. The response had left everyone speechless. But the real work was just beginning. 6 months after their story went viral, David stood in the parking lot of Rosie's Diner, watching the Saturday morning crowd. This was different now. This was beautiful. Families with special needs children filled every booth. Kids with autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy sat comfortably with their parents eating breakfast without fear. The diner had become a sanctuary, a place where being different was normal. Leo tugged on David's hand, pulling him toward the entrance. His son no longer needed headphones here. He walked with confidence, excited to see Rachel. Inside, Rachel was training 2 new staff members, showing them how to use the visual schedules and communication cards. She'd become the informal director of their nonprofit, working part-time at the diner and spending the rest of her hours helping other restaurants implement the program. "David, thank goodness you're here," Rachel called out. "Channel 5 is coming at 10 to film a segment. They want to interview you and Leo for their special on community impact stories." David's stomach flipped. Media attention still made him nervous. In the past 6 months, they'd been featured in local newspapers, parenting blogs, and autism advocacy websites. Each time he worried about exposing Leo to too much scrutiny. But each time the response had been overwhelmingly positive. "Is that okay?" Rachel asked, seeing his hesitation. "I can tell them no if you're not comfortable." Leo was already at their corner booth, arranging his communication cards on the table. He looked happy, settled. This place had given him something David never thought possible, a sense of belonging in the world. "It's okay," David said. "We'll do it." What David didn't tell Rachel was what had happened that week. He'd received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a check for $10,000 and a note. "For Leo and all the kids like him. Thank you for opening my eyes." It was from the man who'd complained during Leo's meltdown 6 months ago. He'd sent the donation with an apology letter. His daughter had just had a baby with autism, and now he understood. People could change. Over breakfast, David watched Leo interact with Rachel. His son was using more gestures now, making eye contact regularly. Last week he'd signed "thank you" for the first time. The real miracle was what had happened beyond Rosie's Diner. Their free training program had been downloaded by over 500 restaurants. A restaurant chain in California had made sensory-friendly hours permanent at all locations. A theme park in Florida wanted to create autism-friendly spaces. Schools were using their communication boards in classrooms. But it wasn't just businesses that were changing. The nonprofit's website had become a community where families shared stories and found support. One message stuck with David. "My son is 5 and nonverbal. I've been too scared to take him to restaurants. But I saw your story. Today we went to a diner that implemented your program. My son ordered his own food." He smiled the whole time. "Thank you for giving me back hope. That's what this was really about. Hope." When the news crew arrived at 10, David was ready. They set up cameras in the corner booth, and the reporter, a kind woman named Patricia, sat across from David and Leo. "Tell me how this all started," Patricia said. David told the story. Rachel's simple act of kneeling down and speaking directly to Leo. The communication board. The weekly visits that became sacred. The meltdown that almost ended everything. And Rachel's determination to turn one painful moment into a movement for change. "What do you want people to understand about children like Leo?" Patricia asked. David looked at his son, who was focused on his iPad but listening in his own way. "I want people to understand that different doesn't mean less. Leo experiences the world differently than other kids, but he still deserves to experience it. He deserves to eat pancakes at a diner. He deserves to feel welcomed and safe. Every child does. And what would you say to parents who are struggling right now? Parents who feel alone?" David's voice cracked slightly. "I'd say you're not alone. There are thousands of us fighting the same battles. And I'd say don't give up on the world. Yes, there are people who won't understand. But there are also people like Rachel. People who will see your child and choose to care. Those people exist and they're worth finding." Patricia turned to Rachel. "You started all of this with a laminated piece of paper and some pictures. Did you ever imagine it would become this?" Rachel laughed softly. "Never. I just wanted to help one little boy order pancakes. But I learned something through this process. Change doesn't always require grand gestures or massive resources. Sometimes it just requires one person deciding to try. One person choosing to see someone who's been invisible. The interview wrapped up and the news crew packed their equipment. Frank came over to the booth looking emotional. "I got a call this morning," he said. "National Restaurant Association wants to feature our program in their training materials. They're sending representatives next month to learn how we did this." Rachel's eyes widened. "Frank, that's huge. That could reach thousands more restaurants." "Tens of thousands," Frank corrected. "Maybe more." He looked at David. "Your boy changed my life, you know that? Changed how I see my grandson. Changed how I run my business. Changed what I think is important." David didn't know what to say. 6 months ago, he was just a tired single father trying to survive each day. Now he was part of something bigger than himself. That afternoon, after the lunch rush, David and Rachel sat in the empty diner going through emails. One email made them both stop. It was from a major foundation that funded disability rights initiatives. They wanted to provide a significant grant, enough to hire staff, expand the program, and reach even more communities. "This is real," Rachel whispered. "We could do this full time." David thought about his quiet life as a freelance designer, the safety of staying home, the comfort of routine. Then he thought about that mother's message. "Thank you for giving me back hope. Let's do it," he said. 3 months later, a place at the table had a small office, 3 full-time staff members, and partnerships with 50 major restaurant chains. They'd trained over 1,000 businesses. Their communication boards had been translated into 12 languages. Parents from 6 different countries had reached out for help, but the moment that meant the most to David happened on an ordinary Saturday morning. He and Leo walked into Rosie's diner as usual. Leo, now 7 years old, walked up to the counter where Rachel was working, and he spoke. Not with pictures or signs. With words. "Pancakes, please," just 2 words. Quiet and unsure, but words. The entire diner fell silent. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. David froze, hardly believing what he'd heard. Leo looked up at Rachel and smiled. Then he signed "thank you," the gesture he'd learned months ago. Rachel came around the counter and knelt down, tears streaming down her face. "Chocolate chip pancakes coming right up, Leo." David had to sit down. His legs felt weak. Speech therapists had told him Leo might never speak. They'd prepared him for a lifetime of alternative communication. And maybe Leo would always rely more on pictures and signs than words. But in that moment, in this place that had become their second home, his son had found his voice. Later, as they walked to their car, Leo held David's hand. He didn't say anything else that morning. He didn't need to. He'd said enough. David looked back at the diner. The red sign. The windows full of families. The place where everything had changed. A single waitress had seen his son. Really seen him. And that simple act of seeing, of caring, of trying, had created ripples that spread farther than either of them could have imagined. Sometimes the most profound changes start with the smallest gestures. A laminated picture card, a kind word, a decision to treat every person with dignity. David had come to Rosie's diner 6 months ago just hoping to get through breakfast without a meltdown. Now he was part of a movement that was changing how the world saw children like Leo. The response had left everyone speechless. But more importantly, it had given voices to those who'd been silent for too long. And it all started with one person who decided that every child deserves a place at the table.